respect to what you say.
Alright, before we start, congratulations for all people making it this far. Opening government, we have UM2. In opening opposition, we have Mara A. In closing government, we have UKM IV. In opposition, we have what you say. Just a general reminder, please don't leave the room between speeches. After the speaker's done, you can leave and keep your here school amendment. Without further ado, we'd like to invite the Prime Minister's staff to speak.
Yeah.
Just a week ago, a very old debate is reignited, right? Because scientists have claimed that they have actually found the gay gene, and so the discussion on whether or not homosexuality is a choice and whether or not it is an inborn trait has been revived again. But then again, we ask ourselves, is this form of discussion any good to the LGBT movement? Because it seems that nowadays, people are more focused on discussing what is the cause of homosexuality instead of discussing what does this LGBT movement want at the end of the day. We want to make sure that we are on the right track again, and we believe that this motion is precisely why we need to refocus our aim. So this is what the mechanism of side opening government is going to be. We believe that in status quo, the active stance of the LGBT movement is to claim that sexuality is not a choice. That means they are born with it, right? You have songs like Same Love, you have songs like Lady Gaga's Born This Way saying that, oh, we're born this way and therefore you should accept us. But then again, we want to abandon that claim. So what are we as the LGBT movement going to do now? We're going to abandon the claim that sexuality is not a choice, but beyond that, we're also going to abandon all claims about the origins of your sexuality. At least right now, the LGBT movement will be solely focused on discussing what do we want, not how do we end up here in the first place, right? So there will be so regardless of whether or not you're a homosexual by birth or whether or not you're a homosexual by choice, we are okay with that. We believe that there should be no discrimination among your own LGBT movement or why exactly are you this way. We believe that we should recognize everyone regardless of their choice, and we believe that the focus now is to make sure that we're on the right path and to gain the aim goal that we want into this debate. So what's the stance for side opening government? It's very simple, right? We're going to prove to you, number one, how the discourse can be better under our side, but number two, on how it is best for the LGBT movement in general, and there are more net benefits than that. Sit down, Alfred. I have two substantives for you. Number one, on the perception of the LGBT movement and how it will be better under our side. But secondly, on the fragmentization within LGBTIQ movement and how we can actually deal with that. Let's move on to my first substantive. Let's look at the perception of LGBT movement nowadays. Yes, we can see that there's a lot of traction going on in the United States of America. More and more states are coming out in support. For example, recently the Supreme Court overruled a certain state's ruling saying that gay marriage is illegal. We see that it's a good sign. But you have to understand at the end of the day, why exactly are we doing that, right? We have to analyze that because it's very important to know that nowadays, most people are supporting LGBT movement not because they actively endorse a choice, but because they view that it's a disability that you're born with. They view homosexuality as someone who are born on a lower pedestal, someone who is disadvantaged from the very beginning. The idea that you cannot choose what you want and therefore we must recognize this is something very harmful at the end of the day. Because now the heterosexuals are putting themselves at a higher pedestal and viewing them as people who are disadvantaged, and therefore we recognize that. It's no longer an idea of equality, because now we are not recognizing you based on your choice. We are not recognizing and legitimizing your lifestyle, but instead we are recognizing your disability and your disadvantage that you're born with, and therefore it's okay for us to support your cause. We believe that it's very bad because you form this idea of LGBT sympathizers who at the end of the day will only support you not because they truly understand you, not because they truly empathize with you, but because they view you as lower beings who due to certain disability that you're born with because you cannot choose, are essentially like this. We believe that's very harmful because we have to understand that your lifestyle should never be used as a result of because of your disability, right? At the end of the, because it's a legitimate lifestyle and because your fight is for equality, you should be able to ask the other groups to recognize and understand your cause, that you're fighting this not because you're born with it, but because you want to do it and you should be okay with it. But at the second level, we look at how this will cause a long-term disadvantage. Because the problem when you play a victim card is at the end of the day, the perception that you have from the initial, but the perception that you set from the very get-go is very hard to sway. people from now onwards, like forever, after the cause of equality, for example, people will still view you as a victim, right? They'll still view you as people who only got this far because we sympathize with you and not because we truly understand you. This is exactly what you see, for example, to the African Americans that you see in the USA now. When they start coming out and say that we deserve rights because we are viewed as people who are disadvantaged from the very beginning, in the long run, even until now, they can never achieve true equality because people still view them as disadvantaged beings. People still think that they can never be equal to us because these are people that have already admitted in the past that they were wrong, people that were admitted in the past that they were, for example, disadvantaged, and therefore the idea is this, right, that they will never be accepted as African Americans because they are capable, but now they will always be accepted because they are viewed as a form of social correction, right, like how we have to view this, and there will never be proper equality for these people. We believe that's very harmful at the end of the day, because if what you're fighting for is equality, it will never be met, because from the very get-go, the claim that you hold on to that you are homosexual not of your choice means that more often than not, the perception of your group itself will be a form of sympathy and not acknowledgement and endorsement. We don't want that. But before I move on to my second argument, sure.
Sir, the public does know what they want. They don't really know what they want because they think being a homosexual is a choice. They always want to be straight. So how do you deal with the issue in your parents?
You see, when you have so much discussion, the only idea of what perception and why the public wants to know whether they are born by choice or because they are born because they're born with it, is because of the perception that the LGBT movement themselves is fighting over why are they gays in the very first place. They are not going on to the end goal of actually reaching equality, but instead, even among the LGBT movement itself, there's always this active discussion on whether or not am I born with it or whether or not we are born with by choice. We believe that that should be, we should be okay with all of that, and instead of letting the public scrutinize you based on what your choice is or whether or not you're born with it, we should instead focus on the discourse of what you want to achieve at the end of the day. This is exactly what my second substantive is going to be, right, where I'm talking about the fragmentization within the LGBTQ movement. Because you have to understand, even now, the LGBT movement themselves have people of different sides. And for example, you have people like Cynthia Nixon, you have people like Neil Patrick Harris who are on the forefront of the LGBT movement, claiming that they choose sexuality because of a choice, right? So even among this itself, we feel it's very unfair for you as an LGBT movement who's representing all these separate groups of people to have the sole stance of us be saying that, oh, homosexuality is a choice. You simply do not represent anyone, everyone in your group. Instead of doing on that, we believe that you should capitalize on the idea that what you want to achieve at the end of the day. Because now we believe that it's inherently unfair that the discrimination happens within the movement itself. What you're going to create is you're going to create more discourse on whether or not what are the true homosexuals and what are the choice homosexuals, right? At the end of the day, you create this idea of a second-class LGBTIQ, because now people will view as if whether or not I'm the superior pure blood like Harry Potter, right, or you are the mud bloods within this movement itself. We believe it's very harmful because at the end of the day, you create this fragmentization and people will be fighting on why am I this way instead of what I want to achieve at the end of the day. We believe that the LGBT movement from the very beginning has been a very inclusionary movement. I believe that you shouldn't go against this principle of inclusion, because now even among yourself you're having this exclusionary principle of what you are at the end of the day and why are you like this. We believe that the stance from opening government is very simple. We want to provide equality, but the way for you to do so is to discuss this discussion of how are you gay and why are you good, but instead what you want to achieve at the end of the day. We're very proud to propose.
That outline should start off the case inside.
Ladies and gentlemen, the LGBTIQ movement are a multifaceted movement in which there are various claims and ideas. And we think one of the most prominent and most effective claims is the narrative that you were born this way. It's a narrative that sexuality wasn't a choice. It was something inherent to your being. Wasn't a life choice like hedonism or any type of life choice that you can fluidly opt into. Rather a choice that was inherent choice, whether it was something that was inherent to you, whether it was something that's transitional. It's something within your inherent instinct that is inherent towards you, and we think that claim is particularly important. This debate is particularly about that sexuality is not a choice, the various impact it has on the movement, the discourse, analyzing social acceptance and how it impacts vulnerable individuals. So firstly, why sexuality is not a choice? We tell you that you can't, the notion is that you can't force an individual to opt out of sexuality that easily. So it isn't something that they can make an active choice to opt out into. It isn't something that you can easily choose one day to say that I'm not a homosexual or I'm not straight and suddenly opt into just because you made that choice. We say that that choice is something inherent to every being of yourself, every personality within yourself and instinct. That means that the idea or notion born this way isn't biological, yet something inherent to your personality. So opting out of something which is within your personality isn't something coherent or something that we're willing to accept on side government. So we say this rhetoric is particularly important to reverse the rhetoric that homosexuals become homosexual because it's a life choice or because it's a choice that they choose just because. We say that it's a choice because it's inherent to their personality. That means that that choice is instinctive to them, which means that it's not a particular choice that they opt into, rather a choice that they were born into. So we think that's a different rhetoric. From the rhetoric that we want. Firstly, two responses to what they said. Firstly, they told you that the gay gene is a problem because people claim that there's a biological need. We say that the LGBTIQ movement never made a particular claim that there was a biological reason for sexuality. Even though the LGBTIQ community was largely divided, most of them recognize that you can never find a gay gene or a particular organ that can make you gay or different in your sexuality. The claim was just that sexuality is one with you. Sexuality is attached to your personality, whether you're straight, bisexual, or homosexual. So we say that the claim that there's a biological reason isn't something that the LGBTIQ movement stand for anyway. Secondly, they say that this attach you to disadvantage. We don't understand why claiming that it's not a choice inherently means that you're claiming that you have a disability. But it's important to regard also that it's okay for the LGBTIQ community to say that they were inherently disadvantaged, to recognize that society isn't accepting them in a way that they want to be accepted, that society needs to give them more rights and inherently recognize the voice that they have and recognize what they need to have. So we don't think recognizing that they are disadvantaged put them in any pedestal of disability. Rather, it makes sure that you identify the problem with society rather than the problem with themselves. My first positive substantive will be about social acceptance and how, on their side, what they do is they minimize sexuality, make it seem like a fluid choice as opposed to an important identity that we ought and should respect. It highlights what we do on our side by saying that sexuality is not a choice. It highlights your struggles in sexuality and our inherent needs to recognize all the struggles that comes with having to fit into a society heterosexual is a norm. As we live in much of society who is most often confused by the notion of different sexual identity that they aren't familiar with, the narrative that this individual have to live with something and cannot be forced to be straight, cannot be forced to be gay, is a notion that's much easily accepted by them. Because if you understand that if society recognizes that they cannot force a choice upon an individual, that it's not a choice that you can manufacture, not a choice that you can make them make, therefore, then it's much easier for the community to move away from things like corrective behavioral programs that church largely do, or programs to make sure that people stop being homosexual. We think all these programs and all these talks are inherently damaging towards the image and identity of homosexuals, especially when society thinks that this is a choice that they can facilitate and push people into. No, thank you. We say that empathy is not sympathy or patronizing, it's the understanding that they have to go through similar struggles, or putting you in that condition that if you were straight and forced to be a homosexual, then how would you be accepted by society? We think that empathy is necessarily a good thing, and you achieve empathy better after the Born This Way movement, when everyone inherently recognizes that it's not something they can detach themselves from, it's something that's extremely important. How does this affect, thank you, sir, the most vulnerable? Because for an individual or someone who just wants to come out as someone who is gay or someone who is or someone who is lesbian or a transsexual, we think this person is struggling with their sexuality. It's easier for them to accept if they know that it was part of that, rather than a choice that they somehow made because they had a defect of personality, or because they live in some area, or because they weren't Christian enough, therefore they made that choice. It's much easier for them to accept that it was part of their personality, it's part of their being, and it's something extremely natural. Because part of what, in a minute, part of what makes you, part of the Born This Way movement was that, I guess not, but part of the Born This Way movement is that it was something natural to you. It was something that you didn't manufacture on your own. It wasn't something that come about in your head, or something that it's inherently natural. It wasn't an abnormality, and we think that's particularly important. So we think what we do towards public and how they accept is public, and particularly the conservative people, will stop demonizing them for opting into this choice just because they want to go against conservative individuals or things like that. We think conservative individuals largely demonize them because they think that they choose this particular lifestyle just the way they choose every other harmful lifestyle. So it's easy for the conservative society to equate their choice to every other harmful choice, as opposed to recognizing that these individuals are inherently different from your heterosexuals, and you cannot force upon the same standard upon them. We think that this is good towards those the acceptance of those communities. So what do we stand for on side opposition? We say a few things. We say that the Born This Way movement have been very beneficial towards the acceptance and identity of many homosexuals in society, as well as have been a lot of positive effect. We do not want to reverse that effect. We oppose.
With that, I'd like to now invite the Deputy Prime Minister to continue the case.
Mr. Speaker, it's funny that leader of opposition admit that within the LGBTQ movement, there are fractions of people that come from different origins, yet they're willing to push away the voices of these minority people who opt into the LGBT movement as a choice to be dishonest on their claim in the name of being effective in propagating a message. Because you're not rebutting the point of how you treat people who make a choice to enter into an LGBT perception to a second-class citizens necessarily. In the LGBTQ movement, you're willing to adopt the same rhetoric as those homophobes out there to judge you based on your origins, to say that I can discriminate you because you're not an effective member of our group, that I can judge you based on your origins of sexuality. That's the same rhetoric that homophobes are using, and you're using it within the LGBTQ movement. That's where you repel those people who might have opted in as a choice. We never know how many people out there who choose to be LGBTQ movement at the age of 25 after going through many heterosexual relationships. That's a traction that you don't want to lose. You're losing and growing your faith among your LGBTQ movement is severely affected when you yourself are fragmentized, and you emphasize that fragmentization by claiming that there's only one correct voice out there to be delivered to the people, that is, you should be born this way. Other choices of going into sexuality is not important or counterproductive to the cause. That's extremely harmful. Please sit down. But the main rhetoric they will come out is this. Well, it's easy to convince people because necessarily you can convince people that it's an inherent trait in you, and there's something that is easier to be accepted. But Mr. Speaker, it might be easier to be accepted, but what is the standard which they judge your acceptance? The heterosexual people will not view you as an equal human being. They will be sympathetic to you like other classes of people. For example, people who have dyslexia, people who have Down syndrome, for example, to view you as a victimized group, and therefore I should give you that particular rights. That is why, for example, in Australia, when people view you, when immigration problem is such a problem, people view you as an immigrant and therefore give you some less rights necessarily. But we should say that the Australian government should adopt the principle that regardless of where you came from or what status you are as a citizen, as long as a human being, you should respect you and give you the full fundamental rights. The very reason why the immigrants now are being discriminated and pushed away from Australian shores is precisely the fact because people judge you based on your origins, to determine where you came from, and not the rhetoric that you are a human being and we should respect you as who you are. The rhetoric of choice or being born into pushes away the idea that you are a human being. and we should respect you as that, nothing more. I should give you rights, not because you are disadvantaged, but I should give you rights because you are simply a human being who is deserving of all the rights as a heterosexual couple. That is the end goal that should be the focus of the LGBTQ movement, instead of being dictated in the terms of the debate by homophobes who can say that the crucial thing now is whether you are born into or whether you opt into. You don't want to get sucked into that debate. You want to push the people that human beings is the standard that you should fight for, and not and regardless of whether you should choose into. You say about corrective procedures and all of that. Even though in status quo the LGBT movement has been emphasizing that sexuality is being born into, the Christian church still does it anyway. They are not the people that you're going to change anyway necessarily. They continue to believe so. But you can also fight that same corrective procedures through the very notion that you're a human being, through the very notion that Christian churches don't brainwash and have special programs for heterosexual couples. You can put the same leverage on them to say that they are human beings. It shouldn't matter on where the origins that they come from necessarily. It's not an important thing. The rhetoric that or the sexuality is birth is something you are born into might be effective at the conception of the LGBT movement during the days before there was any even gay marriage legalized in America. But today, when you already have a huge traction, when more than half of the states in America have legalized gay marriage, you want to adopt a fresh perspective of movement. To view you as a human being instead of saying that you are merely being born into that particular movement. Because you believe that the entire majority of people have already somehow believe that this is something that should be worth fighting for. You don't want to get sucked into the debate of the past. You want to set the debate into the future, where you're respected as people, regardless of your choice or origins of birth. Before that, I'll take one.
But churches already think that most Christians are human beings. It's just that they think they are human beings who are deviant by choice. How do you deal with that mindset with this new stance of the government?
We say that essentially, this kind of rhetoric and choices of the Christian church will never be able to change this society. We think that essentially the movement that the people that should target to are the more middle fences people, who are more moderate and who are able to accept the notion that essentially is something that you're a human being. The Christian church is always going to find fault that even though it's a short, even though you're being born into it, they might say you're inherently evil, for example, and born as an evil person, and I should also correct you as an evil person because there are criminals out there. There are people who have higher aggression biological traits than others. You view them as deviants too, even they are born into it. The church still has an excuse to correct you anyway. So it doesn't really matter on what reality or adoption the church wants to fight into. Let's go to the positive material that we brought to this debate. On the idea that you need to focus on the right questions to this debate and how you gain more traction and more numbers to join the LGBT movement when you accept and you push the idea that it doesn't matter where you come from, just join us and we will show you the light necessary. Focusing on the equality debate. Today, the equality debate is extremely skewed. It's always debated on how you became a gay, or why gay genes should be the scientific breakthroughs of society that is dominating the headlines today. You don't want to pander to this kind of debate, to allow homophobics to dictate the terms of the debate. It should be focused on the end goals necessarily, on why equality should be granted as you, as a human being, not because it's granted to you because you are discriminated and disadvantaged like women or African Americans necessarily. The idea that essentially choice doesn't matter, or where your origin doesn't matter, is the fundamental breakthrough of any human rights advocacy today. Because all human rights instruments and all human rights rhetoric are only effective if you recognize the person as a human being, regardless of their origin. You don't want ideas of cultural relativism, like Saudi Arabian women somehow have less rights than an American woman necessarily. You want all women to have that same particular rights. The end goal is this: regardless of where you came from, regardless of where your origins, or whether you opt into or you wanted to opt out of it eventually, it doesn't matter. Human rights has always been at the forefront, and it's always most effective if you adopt the rhetoric that everyone is equal regardless of its origins, and that is the reality of today. Thank you.
Jasmine, hi. side-opening government cannot operate on absolutes, right? Because this debate has to be about a comparative. When you're talking about a social movement trying to gain recognition within society, under both sides of the house, you will still have positive and negative benefits. Under both sides of the house, you will still have bigots. And recognizing that you will still face some adversities in trying to regain your rights, how do you then best move forward as a social movement? I will answer a few questions in my speech, right? But before I move on, can I just point out that opening government copped out of this debate because they say that you have to address the way in which people want rights but not addressing the origin of fighting for their rights. We think that's a cop-out because it's not addressing how individuals primarily identify with an identity that is so innate and is so important to them. We say that we understand what the gay community want, and I will tell you in my speech how we know what they want. But how do we best get what they want? We'll do that on side of the opposition. Because under that side of the house, they're only saying, what should people do? How should people accept? If only the world was so simple, right? That we don't have bigots that will suddenly change at the point in which you say it's ambiguous of how I was born gay or whatever. The way in which you win this debate is to analyze how individuals react to certain rhetorics, the way in which social progressive movements forward their causes. And that's what this debate is about. Firstly, they say that people will never recognize because of several reasons. One, because you choose to reject the principles that you hold as a person. Apparently, if you choose to empower yourself within one identity, people will be confused to necessarily what you want to achieve. We know what they want, right? The fact that they want legal recognition to enter into civil unions, irrespective of where their weddings are placed. The fact that they want individual rights the same way which heterosexual individuals achieve. The fact that they want to be recognized and not discriminated just because they don't follow some archaic pagan religious people that says you have to choose what is natural, otherwise you are a demon. The fact that some of these individuals want spiritual recognition and still have that irrespective of who they marry. Secondly, they say it's because there is no unity. But we think that every social movement have different views. The same way in which the feminist movement have different schools of thought. But there is a recognition of unity under this movement. Why? Because there is a recognition of irrespective the way in which your sexuality is different from heteronormative norms, with that it's inclusive, that allows for people to be able to enter irrespective of the fact that it's a relationship, right? Thirdly, they say because it's a victim card. We say that this is a legitimate tool for individuals to achieve social recognition. Why? Is victimization necessarily a bad thing? No, thank you. Just because you say the discussion is about who I am and next sympathy, therefore you will never get anything, is true. But the problem, yes, you can get sympathy, but the problem here is this: you have to recognize that sympathy can also bring people to acknowledge and recognize you as an individual. The same way in which the feminist movement always rely upon the fact that we were victims of the oppressions of male privileges, and this is the way in which we want to forward our cause. We think that discussions, no thank you, of being a human being can still coexist with the identity of yourself as a sexuality, right? Because it's innate, it's your identity as a person. Human beings always recognize the different innate identities that we have. For example, we don't attack people on things like race, we don't attack people on things like religion. Sure, there are people in this room that would like to attack me for my race, but that doesn't mean it's a good thing for them to do because it's something that I cannot choose, right? No, thank you. Thirdly, Jasmine told you the reason why we think that this is the best way for you to identify is we mitigate unnecessary attacks in the way in which we forward our social movements. The same way we have to recognize you have bigots under both sides of the house, right? But that's not the large majority that exists within society. You also have individuals that are moderates. You also have individuals that are conservative. You also have individuals that are on the fence and don't know what to feel about you. Under our side of the house, you allow for them to be able to join this movement and help individuals and advocate for it, right? We don't think it minimizes sexuality for individuals. The same way in which we think that identity is in and of itself natural to you, sexuality is in and of itself natural to you. We think that under our side of the house, the conservative society that they wanted to point out is something, it sounds like an atheistic argument in trying to push people out of religion, right? Like all religion is bad. But we don't think that's true because you already have with the status quo some Anglican churches and pastors that allow for people to marry in churches because we think that they recognize that individuals, sometimes the individuals are born into the scenarios and you don't allow for it to happen. But under your side of the house, you make it a lot worse when you allow for it to remain ambiguous. Because when it's ambiguous, people can just attack and say, you don't really know where you come from. It can be a choice as well. That means we can still correct you under that side of the house. But thirdly, I'll also talk about how you necessarily change the discussion and how you make it a lot easier for people to advocate from outside of the movement. I'll take one.
People only give rights in so far as they feel you are disadvantaged and nothing more. For example, women are finding it extremely hard to find the rights of abortion because it's a choice that's dictated by men necessarily.
Yes, but you also have to recognize that within the examples that you're using, for example, that you get some rights as opposed to no rights in absolute. That means there are benefits and you have for sympathy and empathy to exist under that side of the house, as opposed to it remaining ambiguous, and people cannot identify with the identity that you're trying to espouse. Under that scenario, they'll just say, we don't understand what you want because there's no way in which we can identify with what you want, because we don't recognize the way in which you are a human being, because it's not something that is innate and an identity to you. How do you necessarily change discussion? Firstly, in status quo, people can remain ambivalent in the rights of the homosexual community because they can rely upon the fact that the standards of what makes you within that social progressive movement is unascertainable and they don't accept it, right? Because people say we need some scientific conclusive evidence. But we point to you, we don't ask the heterosexual community what is a scientific conclusive evidence that makes you straight, right? And we think that what we do on our side of the house is when you rely upon the born this way rhetoric, is that we move away from heteronormative standards that only heterosexuals are born into the sexuality that they are and the identity that they are. What happens under our side of the house is that the moderates are able to rely upon the fact that these are individuals the same way in which we are born, and not reject them just because it's ambiguous or just because it's a choice that they opt into or that they were forced or coerced into under the scenario, right? This means that you make it a lot easier for other individuals to be able to advocate for the LGBTIQ movement, because the examples that they pointed out, things like Patrick Dempsey, for example, is a person that might not necessarily identify with the movement but wants to fight for the rights of the movement. If you allow for these people to go out, they more likely than not, in terms of you don't know what they want because you're ambiguous, you don't know what they want because it's a choice. That means it's a lot less likely for people to want to participate in fighting for their rights, because there's no way in which they have a strong message in the way they in addressing identity. That means that religious individuals like myself can't come forward and say that we have to have gay rights within any country because these are human beings that we have to recognize are born this way. People like me are rejected because I want to see those, and people don't recognize that. Under our side of the house, we make it a lot easier for you to be able to gain social progression. We are very practical.
With that, I'd like to invite
Mr. Speaker, it's time to understand that at the end of the day, this is not about choice. We from side opposing government will tell you and provide the analysis as how shifting the focus towards equality and acceptance, regardless of the choice, whether or not it's a choice or not at the end of the day, is much better for the movement as a whole. I'll tell you one thing before moving on to anything else. Mr. Speaker, not pushing for the decision that is a choice doesn't mean that you support that at the end of the day, it is a choice, Mr. Speaker. Meaning to say we are progressing further than what is already happening right now in status quo. We need to progress beyond that. Because I'll provide you this analysis. These two thoughts of groups can never reconcile with each other, whether it's a choice or whether it isn't a choice. Mr. Speaker, because they are mutually exclusive to one another, you can never have both of them in the same room. So now, Mr. Speaker, you have two groups of people going head on with each other, who doesn't want to reconcile, Mr. Speaker, because they cannot prove or disprove one another, like what they say. So the side that wants, the side that thinks it's a choice wants the side that thinks it isn't a choice to provide proof, and vice versa, Mr. Speaker. We tell you this is extremely problematic because the discussion ends there and then. There can never be progress, Mr. Speaker, and acceptance if people think that they are always right, Mr. Speaker. We think the proof is flimsy at best, Mr. Speaker, because at the end of the day, they're also using different gauging methods as to how it is a choice and it isn't, Mr. Speaker. The progress can happen if you don't consider the premise of one another. We tell you this is extremely problematic. Because if you listen to what opening opposition mentioned, they say that being victimized necessarily is a good thing. We tell you this is not. Because at the end of the day,
the true intention of the LGBT movement was to gain equality and respect, Mr. Speaker. And this doesn't happen. Why we tell you this? Because we don't empathize on other heterosexuals or people who we think are the same. We treat them as equals at the end of the day. Because if you see the differences that always occur and that they are different from us, it sticks out like a sore thumb. And how can acceptance generally occur under that circumstance? Because we need to progress further than beyond sympathy, because the mindset of sympathizers is this, Mr. Speaker, that they feel that they are more privileged than the other group, and that they are at a special position to have the right to begin with. No one in the LGBT movement wants your sympathy to begin with. We just want you to treat us as equals, because at the end of the day, we are the same being, Mr. Speaker. You need to understand that it's not whether or not one group is better than the other, or it's not about choice, Mr. Speaker. That at the end of the day, we are human beings, and our conscience tells us that we are equal in the end of the day. I'm going to provide the analysis as to how, by not forwarding the idea of choice as a main rhetoric, actually breaks the opposition of this group's rhetoric at the end of the day. Before that, go.
If a person cannot recognize or sympathize or acknowledge because it remains ambivalent or ambiguous, how do you then push people to fight for social progressive movements?
Why not? Because the understanding that we are human beings, that we can never be different, is the true fight, Mr. Speaker. I'll explain it to you right now. Not forwarding choice, Mr. Speaker, can break the opposition's rhetoric. Why? Because we stop feeding the flames of their arguments at the end of the day. Because religious groups and cultural normative, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, it's a choice homosexuals to begin with. But right now, what you're doing, Mr. Speaker, where they are taught that no one is above everyone else, Mr. Speaker, this is where we come in as the idea that human beings are equal, that in the eye of the God, we are all treated equal. When you die, Mr. Speaker, when you go to the gates of hell or heaven, wherever you want to go, Mr. Speaker, you will be judged, you'll be given judgment the same way. And we tell you this is much better, Mr. Speaker, because you generate a discussion that these opposition groups are so familiar with, because they were born in, especially in religious context, Mr. Speaker, whether you're Muslim, Christian, or Buddhist, Mr. Speaker, we treat people the same way. And this is where we think you need to forward your argument there. And this is the shift of focus that you need to do. It's much easier for people to accept and discuss rather than have two head-on arguments that can never reconcile with each other. We are willing, Mr. Speaker, to sit down, to allow this movement to fight in their territory and have discussion there. Why is this so, Mr. Speaker? Because it portrays the LGBT movement to be the less stubborn one, to be the one willing to discuss, Mr. Speaker, and to be the one willing to negotiate. So we shift this the tone of progress, Mr. Speaker, towards the LGBT movement, independent and unmovable progress, Mr. Speaker, and movement. It becomes one that is willing to discuss and willing to fight in the opposition's territory. And what happens then? Because it's also very beneficial for the LGBT movement, because if these religious groups of opposition are unwilling to argue, Mr. Speaker, it just shows that they are archaic and they are unwilling to discuss. This will make them lose the support that they are garnering now, Mr. Speaker. Because we tell you that the groups that want to discuss and the groups that don't want to discuss is now shifting at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker. This is why we tell you it helps. But more than that, my second extension will be talking about choice. Now, sit down. About how using a choice as a rhetoric or not, Mr. Speaker, does not help hiding homosexuals right now who are in need of the help that we can provide them. Because especially if these people belong to within communities that believe that choices is what, this is a choice, Mr. Speaker, and it's extremely difficult to accept themselves and also to liberate themselves from that shackles that is placed upon them by society that they live in. Because Mr. Speaker, number one, they are at risk of being ostracized because they are living in a community and family that tells them that homosexuality is a choice. And if they come up, Mr. Speaker, they will be treated differently at the end of the day. But what makes it worse, Mr. Speaker, is that if they continuously grow up in an environment that emphasizes on choice and yet are unable to change regardless of what the situation is, Mr. Speaker, we tell you they will feel even worse and trapped by these shackles that is placed upon them from the very beginning because they fail to change. And now the burden is on the individual and not how society reacts to them. And we tell you this is problematic, Mr. Speaker, because at the end of the day, you need to analyze, right, that the problem is not these individuals, and the problem is how society treats these people. And we need to start taking that into consideration, Mr. Speaker, because now they are more likely to distance themselves from whatever sexuality that exists within them, Mr. Speaker, and also from other people. And we tell you this is extremely problematic. At the end of the day, what have side opposing government provided to you? We provided to you and we told you, Mr. Speaker, that the debate right now and to progress the movement at the end of the day is no longer about choice or not. It's to accept that every single individual and human being are the same. That we cannot move if we treat one another differently, Mr. Speaker. Even your sympathizers, even your treating as victim, it was efficient probably back then. But now to move forward to really being progressive, Mr. Speaker, you have to leave those rhetoric behind you, and it's problematic because once you're always treated equal and it's always about choices, Mr. Speaker, then there will always be two different and distinct groups arguing between each other, and there can never be true progress because of all those reasons. We're very proud to propose.
Thank you.
Wait, what is it? Like half an hour?
Stop.
Oh, so I can set it to like 7 minutes.
I don't think that.
You will ring.
Oh, you ring. Okay, 8 minutes then. Oh, the stopwatch, yeah. Okay. Sorry. I don't use iPhone, so yeah. Don't judge me, I was born this way. Before I move in my argumentation, let's just refute this ludicrous idea coming out from opening opposition, opening government, that this Born This Way campaign leads gays to be seen as disadvantaged, as in they were like born cripples, right? Less than 50 years ago, African Americans were seen to be less evolved because they look like brutes, so they must be less evolved. They are probably closer to our ancestral apes. Less than 100 years ago, women suffer from the fact that they are seen to be born with less strength. Fast forward to today, we accept these people today, not because we sympathize them as victims of the plight of their birth. We have looked past that, right? And that doesn't change the fact that these people are still born that way, but we respect them because they are born that way, rather than despite the fact that they are born that way. So this Born This Way campaign was never a defeatist one. The LGBTQ movement do not portray their sexuality as a disability that requires sympathy. It is not a victim card. There was never any admission of being wrong. It's simply a cry out that just like how we have come to reject racism, misogyny, Nazi supremacist, anti-Semitic sentiments, which are discrimination based on inedible characteristics which are unjustified and unquestionable, right? These are all other things that are so ingrained in our common consciousness that we have laws against bigotry. We have social media campaigns, right? Like going up against Matt Taylor for being seen as someone who hates women. All the Born This Way campaign movement does is to latch on this broad social consensus and norms that all forms of bigotry are to be scorned. This is a form of narrative that's easily accessible and understand, and hence vital to the success of any social movement that's seeking to appeal to a broad social base. It seeks to create cognitive dissonance due to a realization of our hypocrisy. Ask the question: if we accept gays, if we accept people who are Jewish, why don't we accept people who are from the LGBT community? Because they are exactly the same. You're a hypocrite if you accept one, but not. The precise message of the Born This Way campaign is that diversity is the essence of humanity. That we are one, not despite our differences, but because of our differences. That we cannot judge a person or stereotype a person based on traits you are born in, because all men are born equal. Yes,
look, gender and race was never about choice, because you cannot blame a black woman for being hurt that way because of choice. But sexuality, when being about choice, is so ambiguous and so debatable that it's problematic when you constantly rely on it.
that's why you need the narrative that these people were born that way, just like a black person was born that way. Let's move on into my extension, because I think we need to come to a realization the LGBT movement is not just a protest movement. That in large part, the good work that it does, the most important function in society is to serve as a support network and structure for people out there. It's greatest responsibility to the most vulnerable groups, those people who haven't come to terms with their sexuality, who haven't come out of their closet, especially if they're part of a religious or conservative environment. Someone like Jiat, for example, was born in Iran, perhaps discovered from a young age that he's confused about this strange attraction he develops for his best friend Mustafa at the age of 7 years. At the age of 7 years, and Mustafa starts touching him in weird places, and he starts to feel aroused, right? And what does he do? Because he feels that he doesn't know, he has no idea as to whether or not it's something that he's born with, he has a choice to. He decides that he has to pray, he has a responsibility to exercise agency, try and pray the gay away. He's told by his pastor or imam that he has to stay strong, to fight his inner demons, resist the devil's temptations to be a sinner. He signs himself up for gay conversion therapies as if it's something that can be changed, and hence he should try to change. That's why it's important, like the Born This Way message is important, to dispel any such ideas that these people should try and change what they are because they have a choice. We think the lack of a choice is sometimes then also empowering, right? That's why we think the power of this Born This Way message allows millions of LGBTQ people out there who are still trapped in a vicious cycle of self-doubt and self-blame to try and exercise their agency to make a change, a positive change to their life when they enter heterosexual marriages with someone they do not love. They force themselves to have sex with a woman when they don't enjoy that sex. They torture themselves for the rest of their lives. You see examples of people who have managed to come out of this, like Elton John, who were lucky enough to escape this living hell. How many more people are still trapped in those circumstances? And we think it's much more likely for people to come to that acceptance to themselves, to stop blaming themselves if they realize that they were simply born their way. So much more likely for them to approach a community of LGBT movement to seek help if they feel that they're not actively making a choice, but they're simply coming together, a group of people who are born like them, right? So because if they believe that it is a choice, they will then continue trying to deny their sexuality and suffer as a result. The Born This Way campaign is a slogan, a scion, a shining light which draws people to be attracted to a support structure who will accept them for who they are. Sit down. We think the psychological comfort of LGBTQ is like, you also need to consider a large group of people who are suffering in today's debate, right? These are the LGBTQ people who are LGBTQ but also happen to be religious, who also happen to believe in Islam and Christianity. And the only way they can reconcile their sexuality and their religion and belief in God, hence gaining that psychological comfort, is the belief that if I were naturally born this way, if God made me this way, and if God loves us all, then I cannot be judged at the gates of heaven for something I did not choose, because God is all loving to the man that He has created, that it is not my fault. So if God made me this way, He must love me too. That's why not knowing my origin is the worst thing that can possibly be done. We think the narrative of Born This Way leads people who are both gay and religious to be able to come to terms with that. I think it's particularly important because we don't see why all LGBT people should have to preclude themselves from religion, should have to be told that both are mutually exclusive, because religion is also what brings these people, to give these people psychological comfort and strength to go on and continue and live good life, to believe that one day they can also be accepted, to believe the dream that everyone's very proud of.
Yeah.
gentlemen, above everything, we are all human first and sexual orientation second. And that's what we are trying to push forward coming from the government bench. And we think that the epistemology of or the origin of your sexual orientation is not important, especially when you want to progress in terms of LGBTQ movement forward. And I'll present to you two clashes today. Firstly, how personal acceptance of sexual orientation is easier under our paradigm, regardless if you are heterosexuals or either you are from the LGBTQ movements. Or secondly, how moving forward from the epistemology of sexuality will progress the movement further. This is directly the extension also coming from closing government. But before that, one rebuttal directly towards them, because I don't see many extension or any extension coming from this, mostly rebuttals. But here's the idea. The idea is that when you say that we are born this way, that this is natural, that this will appeal to most people or to broad social strata, and that the idea is that diversity of humanity exists because you believe that people are born in different type of ways. But this disregard choices as a form of diversity, because we think that even if you are born that way or not born that way, because we think that choices also make you diverse in one way. And even more than that, we think that respect and acceptance is not necessarily because you are born in any ways, but because of your choices themselves. Because we think choices are also meant to be respected and not necessarily what is biologically or naturally coming from you. We think that's far more important. Sit down. But before I move on to my class, I'll re-establish our extension. You think that we have already established one thing coming from closing government, especially, right? We think that these two groups, people coming from the LGBTQ movement and the conservative people, aka the religious people and the bigots, cannot reconcile with each other. Because one group say that they are born this way, and the other group will say that it is always a choice. But we think that they can never reconcile. That is coming from closing government. We believe that we should just let it remain and move forward from the origin and move forward towards the goal of what LGBTQ movement wants. So that's why the true acceptance can only be achieved when you realize differences in the human population. That's not necessarily biologically, but also in terms of choices. Because we think that equality is not just because of pity, equality is not just because of sympathy, but equality is also because of your choices or whatever it is that you are born with, right? And secondly, we think that not pushing choice as main rhetoric will break into the opposition's rhetoric, right? Because we think that, as I first said, we cannot reconcile these two groups. But because of that, when we think that there are two types of people, even you have different types of people in terms of LGBTQ movements, we think that then you can improve discussion, because which choice is more legit? Then this discussion can exist. Is your choice to be gay, or is your choice to remain as yourself is legitimate? Which type of choice is better? Or if you are born this way, will you be, this type of discussions happens better. But before I move on to my classes,
Religious rhetoric will always exist because the word of God is enough. If heterosexual advocates like myself can rely on the born-this rhetoric from people like Alfred, wouldn't it be a lot easier for us to talk and push forward the recognition to moderates and conservatives?
I'll talk to you later in my second class, right? But furthermore, in terms of my first class or first issue, personal acceptance of sexual orientation is easier under a paradigm. Because they already established that there are multifaceted origin of sexual orientation. But what they have been doing, right? They close the idea that, look, you might be gay by choice, not necessarily born this way. We think that their assumption is this, right? If a person is confused of their sexual orientation, then they are automatically not straight. They are automatically gay. This is what assumption they have made. Because you think that, because this can establish under their paradigm, because you are confused. You're already confused of your sexual orientation. If you are born that way, meaning you are confused with sexual orientation, then most probably, or the more likelihood that you are gay. Because some people who are confused wants to or prefer the heterosexual life for whatever reasons, right? But because of that, they push or they put forward, they close down that avenue for people to make choices. Because we think that in any way, if you want to be gay or not be gay, you can make choices, one, or secondly, you can accept either you are born that way or not born that way. Because we think that coming from outside, having that choice or having that acceptance is far better. Sit down. Moving on to my second issue, right? How, moving forward from the epistemology of sexuality, we progress the movement better. We think that under status quo, the battle of these big rhetorics head-to-head is not going to move the movement further forward. Because we think that conservative society will always want to correct LGBTQ movements regardless if you are born with it, or even if that's the choice, that's what we have established, right? But even more than that, because we think that the idea of being born with it will propagate the idea of disability, because you are born with something that is not normal under the conservatives' idea. Because you are born with something that is not normal, then you can be corrected. But the analogy is simple, because if you are physically disabled, then people want to help you, or people want to correct you. People want to make you normal, or at least function as normal as what society thinks normal is. And because of that idea, we believe that the likelihood of conservatives want to correct you because you are born that way is more capable. Because we think that if you are born with this ability, people are more likely to want to correct you and whatnot, right? Because this is different with races, because this goes with the psychokinesis of people, not necessarily with skin color and biologically or whatever, right? It's more to identify. Sit down. But even more than that, because we think that under their paradigm, the progress of LGBTQ movement cannot move forward because there's two different types of group of people. We have already established that. But even more than that, you know what? There are also LGBTQs who lives in religious communities or in conservative communities, right? That's one thing. But this is the idea that coming from Alfred, right? He said that people who are religious, who are LGBTs, if you use the tagline of being born this way, then you would accept yourselves. But on the flip side, right? There are people who are conservatives, who are religious, but who are gay, hates God because of that. Because we think that not everyone will eventually, because they hate God, because God, you say that this is wrong, but why you make me gay? Why you make me born this way? We think that that's one way to put it forward. I think in Malaysia, that's one of the most prominent idea that people are becoming hateful to the community and towards religion because of that, because the idea of being born that way. But if you already believe in God, if you already love God, then why not you let yourself being judged despite of your choices or despite of you being born that way? I think that's far more important in moving forward, right? So what have we established coming from closing government? We have established that to move forward, we need to remove beyond the origin of sexuality. For all of those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to propose. Thank you.
Now, finish off the debate.
Yeah.
Let me see a page. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk about two issues in debate. First, I'm going to look at the way social movements make progress. I'm going to look at the effect on individuals who are going through issues with their sexuality when they're growing up. So firstly, the way social movements make progress. You see, in the grand old days of Henry VI, right? Often you make changes, socially speaking, by using brute force. Like, when you want to get the right to divorce, you bring 1,000 knights and tell the Pope to fish off if he doesn't let you divorce, right? But that doesn't work today. And in today's world, you need ideas. And that's how you get people to recognize maybe we should change the way we treat individuals, minorities, and the like. So often what you have to do in today's world, that's why we've always been arguing, right? You need to incept an idea in the population, in the minds of the population. They will start realizing maybe we should give rights to individuals, to certain groups. But the issue is big, really. It's not just an idea. The fact is, you need a persuasive idea. You need to have an idea that people will buy into, and hopefully through the persuasive idea, over time, people on their own, through like in the movie inception, they say, yes, of course we should have given women rights all along. Of course we should give gay rights all along. And that was the biggest problem with the government's team. They never once explained why this idea that they do stand for, of humans being equal, is truly persuasive enough to honestly have any real effects on the minds of people in the population. And what we have stated all along in opposition to this speaker, that we disagree that it's a persuasive idea. Of course, it's an ideal. Of course, we will love that. That's ideal. But it's not a good enough idea to set in mass people to achieve the kind of change you want to achieve with regards to people like. Why is it so? Because the truth is, in even today's modern times, there's a universal belief that humans are not all equal. Sit down, guys. Like convicts are treated differently. We treat minors differently. Foreigners are treated differently. We do it all the time. Like politicians, even members of the public often use the argument that not everyone's equal because there are reasons for why we should treat them equally. This idea has no starting point at all. At most, it's an ideal we should aspire to. But it's not a persistent idea that to achieve and change will achieve. Which is what we want to get people to actually overcome the bigotry and accept gay people who they are. Despite the fact that they engage in sexual practices that are not to their liking. And we really want to argue on this house in contrast, done guys, that the idea that propagate people who have a choice over their particular state of affairs, over their lifestyle, is far more persuasive. Why? Because history is on our side. This mantra, this slogan, this idea we are having, is the very same reason often used by all movements that pass. That's how we got women, the right to vote in America in the 18th century. But the argument was the fact that a female it's not a choice they make. So even if you believe that women are innately inferior because back in the old days, when men thought that women are weaker or like, the fact is they didn't choose that state, and that's how you often want people to kind of move over on the side. This is the same idea recently we used to get a black support. So history is on our side far more than on them. Secondly, you argue, and what we say all along, guys, that it's not easier for an everyday man on the street, to relate to the argument and idea that that you have no choice over your affairs, and hence I should not be against you. And we have this idea all the time. Like, even in schools, the of how you should treat a minority in the class, or how you should treat like a fat kid or a guy, who has got 100 discs and the like. We often use this idea in the other sector when we educate young people. And in that same idea of having no choice and why choice it's also used now, even in public policy, like in law, for example, like the idea of like criminal defense. They say, if you have no choice but to kill the guy who's going after the knife, then you should be excused from your crime. It's not your fault. Like you have no choice over the fact that you're going to be targeted. Or like when we take land from some community because we need to like rebuild land, we compensate them because they have no choice over the fact that the land is taken away to get to compensate them. The idea of that we should not screw you over because you have no choice over the land. Sometimes ingrained that it's just logical, not more sensible. But thirdly, you always say is that actually this new PR campaign that they don't run, it's not mutually exclusive from what we're saying. I just don't see why you can't say both things at one time. Why can't we see humans are equal and also say, you should screw over just because you have no choice over your affairs? No one said why an entire government segment was abandoned. All they've done is do a PR speech for all speakers about how it's going to be human and equal, but not say why you abandoned the claim that you are. You have no choice. It's the motion. Yes.
If I am now sexually attracted to Jiat and I choose to be bisexual, will I be forced to admit that it's not a choice to be protected and by the LGBT movement?
Wait, okay. This is how they're going to build this communities. And this is interesting because they I don't know, but for some reason, in opening government, they actually openly say they're not going to try to change at all the risk because they are hopeless and there's nothing you do about them. But those are the very same people that they have to compete with because no one else is against the LGBT right. Like there's no below the fence argument. People are either for or against the LGBT movement. So the truth is, our own PR campaign is almost persuasive because the religious folks out there find this idea of individual choice something they can really do, and that's what get change happening a lot more likely. So now, guys, yeah, page 3 now. So no, page 4. Before that, no, guys, that's page 4. Okay. Okay. Then we argue. What about those who opt to be sexual, gay one day, and then the next day they're not gay? And this, I think that's what it's about largely. Dude, there's no issues that there's no problem facing bisexuals, existing in generally speaking. The biggest issue today is that LGBTs, like people are just gay, alright, come and get married, period. They get fired in Texas from the workplace. That is the first problem of today. They need to figure because those are real dire problems as opposed to someone's random music. But tomorrow on like give a low job. Next day I like have someone who didn't ask. Like that is not the pressing problem. The pressing problem is large segment of the population can't even get access to basic needs and like to answer. But then the one thing is that they say this in their big speech, right? Like, oh look, we will now have their stance will have some effects on churches who engage in corrective programs because now we've abandoned the argument for choice and the like. But you see in opening government speeches, they can never change churches, they can never do anything because they're hopeless. On our side of the house, what we say quite strongly, the speaker, that the only way to change moderates is if you use an idea that you can relate to. Now, lastly, on the part of the individuals, the truth is when a guy grows up in a religious household and he's come to terms with his sexuality, as far as you find consolation in the knowledge that there's no control over overseas affairs, then in this PR campaign, they're all equal. Because the truth is, the ideas of that, the idea that you should not be faulted because you have no choice, is something every child understands. The idea that humans are all equal, no one buys. But you don't buy the argument because it's not obvious around them. They see the parents treat their neighbors differently. They see the government treat foreigners differently. When this is not happening at the early age, of course you will not be comforted by this PR campaign. The better approach, and we always say, one is not mutually exclusive at all actually to what the governments are doing. To say you have no choice over who you are, and we should not discriminate against you. And that's why you see people be happier, they be a lot more fulfilled, feedback to folks.
Good, now I invite everyone to leave the room. Thank you, Jay.